Hey viewers! Hope you're all doing great. Before I start the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. It begins with the sound of dripping wax. Slow, deliberate, almost like the ticking of time itself. In the narrow streets of Canterbury, long before the hum of machines and the glare of gaslight, a single workshop glowed faintly at dusk. Its windows breathed out a golden mist, and from within came the scent, sweet, thick, unmistakable, of melting beeswax. The air outside was cold, touched by the breath of an English winter, and the smell of wax and smoke floated softly into the quiet lanes like a promise of warmth. And inside that glow, someone hummed. It was not a melody one could name, just a tune the candle maker carried with him since boyhood, a tune that rose and fell with the rhythm of his work. He was an old man by then, his beard the color of ash, his hands veined and roughened by years of dipping wicks into molten gold. Each candle he made seemed to trap a little sun inside it. When lit, it burned steady, warm, and silent, as though holding a fragment of day that refused to die. But few in Canterbury knew his name. They passed his shop, nodded politely, bought their candles before Easter or before weddings, then went away. Yet there were whispers that he had once made candles for the cathedral itself, for the monks who prayed through nights so long that dawn came trembling on their lips. Others said he had been a traveler once, before finding peace here among the scent of wax and the sound of dripping light. The truth was quieter and stranger. For years he worked alone. His tools never changed. An iron cauldron blackened by use, rows of wooden rods, and bundles of wick cut from flax. Every evening, as the bells of Canterbury Cathedral tolled Compline, he began. He would heat the beeswax slowly, never rushing, never letting it burn. He watched it turn liquid, pale as honey in summer. Then he dipped the wicks, one after another, lifting them, letting the air cool them, then dipping again. It could take 100 dips before the candle was ready. Outside, night grew thicker. The people of Canterbury shuttered their windows, lit their lamps, and the faint hum of the candle maker continued. Steady, hypnotic, as if he worked in rhythm with the heartbeat of the old city itself. One might say there was nothing unusual in this. Candle makers were common across England in those days, their craft vital to the rhythm of life. Without them, darkness ruled. No evening prayers could be said, no letters written, no meals shared after sundown. The making of light was, in truth, the quiet foundation of every home and chapel. Yet this man's light had something different. Those who burned his candles claimed they lasted longer, their flames clearer, their scent softer. And when a candle was set before a sickbed, the patient often recovered. When one was lit during childbirth, mothers whispered prayers of gratitude. Still, he never spoke of blessings or miracles. He said only, "Wax remembers light." The townsfolk smiled, thinking it a poet's whimsy. But to him it was simple truth. The bees that gathered sunlight into honey had already captured the day. When he melted their wax, he was melting sunlight itself, letting it breathe again. The wick, he said, was just the bridge, the way the light found its way back to the world. And perhaps that was why, on certain nights, the light in his shop never went out. One evening, around the year 1349, the bell of St. Dunstan's church rang not for prayer but for warning. The pestilence had come, the great death, as they would later call it. People shut themselves indoors. The air grew heavy with fear. Trade slowed to silence. But through the terror and the hush, the candlemaker's little shop still glowed. Neighbors swore they saw him working, alone as ever, though no one dared approach. The wax must have been scarce by then. Bees had died in abandoned hives, fields lay empty, and even the monks of the cathedral had ceased their nightly vigils. Yet his window stayed warm. And some claimed that, on one night of deepest fear, a pale stranger came to his door. A traveler dressed not as pilgrim or merchant, but in plain wool and dark hood, face hidden. They spoke for a long while. No one heard what was said. But the next morning, the candle maker's door was locked. Days passed, then weeks. The townsfolk, too frightened to check, left him to his silence. Only later, when the plague loosened its grip and life began, slowly, to crawl back into the streets, someone found the door ajar. Inside, the shop was still warm, the air thick with wax and honey. On the table were rows upon rows of candles, dozens, maybe hundreds, each one gleaming faintly though no flame touched them. And on the wall, written in soot above the hearth, were words that chilled even the bravest hearts. Light remembers. No one ever saw the candle maker again. But for years afterward, people in Canterbury swore that when they lit one of his candles, they could hear a faint humming, like a man at work somewhere beyond the reach of time. The kind of sound that comes not from lips, but from memory. Perhaps it was only the wax whispering as it melted. Or perhaps the candle maker, wherever he had gone, still made light for those who needed it most. Outside, the cathedral bells tolled once more, softer now, for peace returned to the city. And though the candlemaker's workshop stood empty, that golden scent, beeswax and smoke, still lingered, curling through the alleys of Canterbury like a ghost that refused to fade. And yet, on certain cold evenings, when the mist rolled low and the wind came down from the hills, a flicker appeared in that long-abandoned window. Not bright, not steady, just a quiver of light like a breath remembering warmth. Some said it was a reflection from the cathedral lamps. Others were not so sure, because if one stood long enough, one could almost see the shape of an old man inside, dipping his wicks, humming softly, patient as the turning of the seasons. And sometimes, if the night was very still, so still you could hear the river Stour whispering to its banks, you might even smell the faint sweetness of beeswax once again. And that was where the story truly began. The morning after the strange flicker was seen, the townspeople whispered as they passed the shuttered shop. The wooden sign still creaked above the doorway, its letters faded. Candeli per manus Johannes. Candles by the hand of John. Few remembered him by name, but now it seemed the name had returned, like a word spoken back into the world by flame itself. There was no family left to claim his belongings. The Guild of Chandlers, the candle-makers' brotherhood, took cautious inventory, fearing disease still lingered on his tools. Yet the place felt untouched by death. The air was warm, sweet, and strangely alive. Every tool sat neatly arranged. The brass ladle, the dipping rods, the iron cauldron polished from years of use. And the rows of candles, perfect, pale, unlit. The guild master, Thomas Aylmer, crossed himself and muttered, "He must have worked till the end." The guild took the candles for safekeeping, though some refused to carry them. One man swore the wick of his candle felt warm in his fingers. Another said he saw it quiver, as though drawing breath. Yet they packed them all into crates, marked them with wax seals, and stored them beneath the cathedral cloister. Winter passed. By spring, Canterbury lived again. The markets reopened, the pilgrims returned, and the cathedral bells rang for weddings instead of funerals. But something quiet changed in the city's nights. People said the air after dusk seemed brighter somehow, that even a single candle threw its glow farther. In the inns along Mercery Lane, travelers told tales of strange blessings, how a single flame burned through an entire vigil without guttering, or how the scent of honey lingered in rooms where none had been lit. It was not long before a monk from the cathedral came searching for answers. Brother Matthew was his name, a scholar of humble mind, more accustomed to books than mysteries. He had served in the scriptorium, copying texts by the wavering light of tallow lamps. His eyes had grown weak, his patience thinner. So when he heard of candles that burned steady and pure, he asked the prior for permission to examine them. The prior hesitated. "Superstition spreads faster than fire," he said, "and both leave ashes. But if truth be found in wax, find it." So Brother Matthew went below, into the cool stone vaults beneath the cathedral. The crates were there, lined against the wall like coffins. He opened one and found the candles just as described, smooth, even, almost translucent. He took one to his cell, placed it on the desk beside his parchment, and struck a spark. The flame rose clean, silent, and golden. He watched as it burned. No smoke, no sputter, no scent of tallow. Just warmth and a light that seemed gentler than any he had known. The wax melted slowly, evenly, as if guided by a calm breath. And as the room filled with that golden hue, something stirred in his memory. A sound he could not name. A faint hum, soft and low, like a tune carried through thick honeyed air. He leaned closer. The flame wavered once, almost like a nod. That night, Brother Matthew wrote in his journal, "The light from this candle gives no pain to the eyes. It warms without burning. Think, it remembers something. Perhaps the hand that made it. Perhaps more." The next morning the candle still burned. And for nights thereafter, he lit it again and again, transcribing ancient texts, working longer than he thought his body could bear. His ink did not dry, his mind did not wander. He felt as though the light itself watched over him. Then one night, as the flame thinned near its end, he saw it flare, bright as dawn, and vanish. The wick curled into ash, and in that silence, Brother Matthew heard a voice. Not words exactly, but a whisper that touched his thoughts. Wax remembers light, and light remembers hands. He fell to his knees. By morning he told no one. But the next week, at Vespers, the prior noticed the candle missing from Matthew's cell. When asked, he simply said, "It burned away," and that was all. Yet the monks noticed a change in him. His patience returned, his eyes clear, his work flawless. And though no one dared speak it aloud, they felt it too. That when the evening lamps were lit in the choir, their light glowed with the same serene hue as the candle from the chandler's hand. Meanwhile, the townsfolk of Canterbury began to tell new stories. They said the candlemaker had not died at all. That the man seen before the plague, the hooded stranger, had taken him somewhere beyond the walls. Some claimed it was an angel, others death itself. But the more practical said he had simply left, wandering like a pilgrim toward London or the sea. Yet no one ever found his tools sold, nor his skill copied. And wherever one of his candles was burned, it was said the flame bowed slightly eastward, as though toward the cathedral that still rang the same old bells. It became a quiet tradition among travelers. Before leaving Canterbury, they would pause near the empty shop and leave a coin on the doorstep. Not for luck, not for prayer, but for light. Years passed. The world changed, slowly as the world always does. But the memory of the candlemaker lingered in the city's air, soft as the scent of wax that still clung to the old timbers of his workshop. In 1376, when Edward the Black Prince's funeral procession passed through Canterbury, the monks lit candles along the route. Among them were a few of those old beeswax sticks found years before, kept hidden in the cathedral's vaults. They burned throughout the night, never dimming, their light touching the prince's gilded coffin like sunlight on water. And though the city mourned, the air felt strangely at peace. Brother Matthew, now old and frail, watched from the cloister gate. He whispered a prayer not for the dead prince, but for the man who had made light from silence. When a novice asked him what he prayed for, he only smiled and said, "For those who dip their hands in wax, so that others may see." The novice didn't understand, but perhaps he would someday. And in the hush that followed, the last of those ancient candles burned down to its base. Yet before the flame died it shimmered, just for a heartbeat, into the shape of a hand, open and calm. Then it was gone. The ashes fell soundlessly to the stone floor, and the scent of beeswax drifted up once more, faint but alive, like a memory too soft to fade. And far beyond the cathedral walls, in the forgotten part of Canterbury where mist gathered thick over the river, an old window glowed again. By the time the century turned, the name of John the candlemaker had slipped from guild records entirely. His workshop, however, remained, its beams grey with age, its thatch patched and sagging, the faint scent of beeswax still trapped deep in the wood. The townspeople walked past without thought, for time had swallowed his story into the hum of new lives. Only the very old remembered that there had once been a man who could trap sunlight in wax, who hummed while he worked, and whose light never truly went out. But one wet spring morning, something drew a small crowd to that forgotten corner of Canterbury. The door of the workshop had swung open during the night. Rain had washed the dust from the threshold, revealing a trace of footprints, small, barefoot, leading inward. A few children from Stour Street swore they had seen light inside before dawn. The adults dismissed it as childish fancy. Yet curiosity pulled them closer. Inside, the air felt still, untouched for years. Shelves leaned under the weight of cobwebs. The cauldron sat empty, a thin crust of wax clinging to its rim like amber frost. But there, on the work table, lay something new. A candle, tall and smooth, its surface faintly warm. It could not have been there for decades, and yet it was fresh. Thomas Aylmer's grandson, now the new guild master, came to see it himself. He was a cautious man, not prone to believing in wonders. He turned the candle over in his hands, saw the fine flax wick, smelled the beeswax. Perfect craftsmanship. He brought it to the guild hall, thinking to examine its make, and that evening after supper, curiosity got the better of him. He lit it. The flame rose straight and clear, steady against the draught. No flicker, no smoke. And in the silence that filled the hall he thought, just for a moment, that he heard something behind the flame. A low hum, old as the city, rising and falling like breath. He put it out at once, but sleep came poorly that night. The next morning he found the wick whole again, unburned. The candle looked untouched. Word spread quickly. Some said it was a sign, others a trick. But a young apprentice named Alice, whose father kept bees outside the city, begged to see it. "Let me light it," she said softly. "Bees know their maker's scent. If the candle remembers, perhaps the bees will too." So they took it to her father's hives at dusk. The air was heavy with clover and damp earth, the hum of bees settling into sleep. Alice placed the candle on a stone, struck a spark, and watched the flame rise. What happened next would be told in whispers for generations. The bees stirred. Slowly at first, then all at once, they rose from the hives. Not in anger, but in calm, circling the flame in a golden halo. Their wings shimmered in the glow, as if caught in honeyed air. Alice's father fell to his knees. The flame did not scorch them. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat, and when the bees settled again, they left a faint dusting of pollen on the candle's surface, glowing faintly in the dim light. Alice touched the wax. It was warm but not melting. And she thought, though she could never prove it, that she heard a man's voice humming somewhere beyond the trees. After that night, she kept the candle locked in a small wooden box. "For light in times of darkness," she would say when asked. And though she never lit it again, the wax stayed warm for the rest of her life. Decades passed. The world shifted once more. The age of guilds waned, and new trades rose in their place. Canterbury grew louder, busier, its lanes crowded with carts and markets and pilgrims bound for the shrine of St. Thomas. Candles gave way to oil lamps, then lanterns, but in the quiet corners of old houses, wax still waited. And one such house belonged to a bookseller named Edmund Hargreaves. He had inherited Alice's candle quite by chance, through a cousin's estate. To him, it was a curiosity, something to place on a shelf beside old manuscripts and reliquaries. But on a winter's night in 1422, as snow smothered the city and his hearth went cold, he found himself reaching for it. He lit it, and the room filled instantly with golden warmth. The scent, that same soft honey, that whisper of bees, wrapped around him. His eyes, weary from reading, eased. The letters on the page seemed to glow more clearly. He worked for hours without fatigue. But near midnight, as he turned a page, he noticed something strange. The ink on the parchment shimmered. He leaned closer. The words shifted, faintly, as if alive. One line caught his eye. "Wax remembers light, and light remembers hands." He blinked. The phrase wasn't part of the text. He knew it. He had copied this manuscript himself. Yet there it was, as though written in invisible ink that only the candle could reveal. The flame quivered once, and then softly the air changed. He felt a presence, not frightening but vast. a quiet awareness, like a memory pressing against his thoughts. He could almost see it, a figure bent over a workbench, dipping wicks, humming softly in rhythm. Edmund whispered into the stillness. "John!" The flame trembled. He reached for his quill and began to write, though his hand moved as if guided. Line after line flowed across the parchment, not his own words but another's. Recipes for pure wax, notes about bees in spring, a meditation on how sunlight bends in the honeycomb. The handwriting was unfamiliar, looping, old-fashioned. When the last line appeared, the candle flickered and went out. And Edmund read the words, his heart pounding. When wax and flame remember one another, the maker is never gone. He sat in silence until dawn. When he woke the next morning, the candle stood whole again, wick unburned, wax smooth, as though the night's miracle had been nothing but a dream. But on his desk lay the parchment, still inked, still real. He took it to the cathedral archivist, who examined the writing carefully. "This hand," the archivist murmured, "is of mid-14th century style, the kind used by tradesmen, not scholars." Edmund said nothing. The archivist looked up. "Where did you find this?" "In the light," Edmund replied softly. That evening, the archivist visited the old chandler's shop, now only ruins of timber and moss. He brought no companions, only a lantern. He set it upon the work table where, long ago, the candle maker had stood, and whispered into the empty air. "If you remember, show me." The lantern flame bent sideways, toward the corner where the old cauldron still rested, and from within the cold iron, a faint golden glow began to stir, pulsed once, then faded, leaving only the scent of beeswax in the night. The archivist stood very still. "Wax remembers," he whispered to himself, and then quietly, "but what else does it remember?" Outside, the cathedral bells rang midnight, and for a moment, just long enough to feel, Canterbury shone as though lit from within, as though 1,000 unseen candles burned together beneath the same ancient sky. The year was 1431 when the first written account of the Candlemaker of Canterbury found its way into a parish chronicle. It was brief, barely a paragraph, penned by a monk who seemed uncertain whether he was recording a miracle or mere gossip. He wrote, "In the town, there was once a maker of wax lights who vanished during the time of pestilence. Some say his candles yet burn, though none can tell by whose hand they are lit." And below, in faded Latin, a second line appeared. "Memoria lucis non moritur." The memory of light does not die. Few paid attention to such notes. The Middle Ages were thick with marvels, saints' relics, visions and omens, and a single craftsman's mystery was a small thing beside the roar of wars and kings. Yet quietly the story endured. By mid-century, pilgrims who came to Canterbury to honor St. Thomas Becket began stopping not just at the shrine, but at a small wooden box placed near the cloister gate. Inside they left candles. Ordinary ones, tallow or beeswax, marked with the sign of a single drop of soot, said to represent the hand of the lost chandler. Monks collected them, melting them together once a year to create what they called lux communis, the common light. Those candles were burned on the eve of Easter. It was said the light they gave was gentler than any other, and their smoke carried the faint scent of honey and wildflowers. Brother Stephen, who kept the sacristy records in 1454, described the phenomenon in his neat, careful hand. "When we light the common light, a calm passes over all who stand near. It is as though the flame breathes, and though the wax diminishes, the wick remains whole till the final prayer is said." No one could explain it. In that same year, an apprentice to the cathedral's glazier, Thomas Brigham, claimed to have seen an old man at dawn near the crypt, moving among the votive candles, trimming their wicks. His beard was white, Thomas said, and his hands were steady as a craftsman's. "I thought him one of the lay brothers until he looked up. His eyes were grey as ash, and there was wax upon his sleeves. When the boy blinked, the figure was gone. Only the scent of beeswax lingered." The prior, when told, said gently, "You have seen memory. It walks where the living forget." And so the story passed again into silence. But Canterbury was changing. Traders came from Flanders and Gascony, bringing oil lamps and glass. Candles grew cheaper, their making less holy, more trade than craft. Yet still, when great ceremonies were held, the monks would seek out the old recipes. Pure beeswax, spun flax, cooled in patient rhythm. It was during this quiet decline of the old ways that another event rekindled the legend. In 1472, a mason repairing the northern wall of the cloister discovered a small recess sealed with wax. Inside lay a folded parchment wrapped in linen. When opened, it revealed careful instructions, not for prayer, but for the preparation of wax. Every line described in tender precision the cleansing of honeycomb, the filtering of molten wax through linen, and the rhythm of dipping. But at the end was something stranger still. Do not fear the dark that follows day, for in the making of light lies remembrance. Let each candle bear a breath, that it may one day return. There was no name, only a faint seal of a single honeybee pressed in wax. Scholars puzzled over it. The handwriting matched no monk's. The seal was unlike any known guild mark. Some thought it the work of a mystic, others a poet. But a few, those who had heard the old story, knew better. They said softly, "It's him." The parchment was locked in the cathedral archive, but copies spread. Across England, chandlers began whispering the words before dipping their first wick of the season. Let each candle bear a breath. Some laughed at the superstition. Others swore it made the flame steadier. Time went on. By 1500, Canterbury thrived again. A bustling market town with cobbled lanes and the chatter of traders from every shire. The old chandler's shop was long gone, replaced by a merchant's house. Yet those who dug foundations nearby found strange things. Bits of wax still fragrant, wicks preserved as though untouched by time. One mason said his torch dimmed whenever he brought flame near them. And once more, in taverns and markets, the story was told. But now it had grown. They said the candlemaker had struck a bargain with the light itself, that his soul was bound to every flame he made, and that whenever his candles burned, he lived again for a moment in their warmth. A comforting thought, perhaps, though some found it unsettling. If light remembers him, a widow once murmured, then does he remember us? That same year, a scholar from Oxford named Geoffrey Langdon visited the cathedral. He came not for relics but for rumors, carrying notebooks and curiosity. He spoke with monks, merchants, even the old beekeeper outside the walls. And one cold evening, by candlelight, he wrote his conclusion. It seems this candlemaker, if he ever lived, became more than man, a symbol of the quiet persistence of light. Yet there are those who claim his craft defied time itself. For they say that in wax, the memory of touch endures, that what the hand shapes, the flame recalls. And if this is true, then perhaps no maker is ever truly lost. He closed the book and blew out his candle. For a heartbeat before darkness fell, the flame lingered, longer than it should have. Then, as the room dimmed, a faint hum brushed the edge of hearing. It was not loud, not clear, just the memory of a tune. And in that silence, Geoffrey Langdon, scholar and skeptic, whispered into the air, "If you are still there, I understand." He told no one what happened that night, but he left Canterbury with a single beeswax candle wrapped in linen. It was found among his belongings years later, still unburned, faintly warm to the touch. The light of memory, it seemed, refused to die. And so, century by century, story by story, the name of the candlemaker lived. No longer a man of flesh, but a keeper of something gentler. The patient, golden rhythm of work done with care, the quiet faith that even in the smallest light something eternal breathes. Outside, Canterbury's bells rang again. New bronze replacing old, their tone brighter, sharper. But beneath their sound, if one listened closely, another note lingered, softer, steady, ancient as wax. The hum of a craftsman at his bench, dipping his wicks into the warmth of remembered sun. And somewhere, perhaps beyond the reach of time, that same flame flickered once more, waiting to be found. The 16th century arrived like a storm over England. The monasteries fell silent one by one. their bells taken down, their altars stripped bare. Henry VIII had turned his face from Rome, and Canterbury, once a jewel of pilgrimage, now trembled under the weight of change. Pilgrims ceased to come. Relics were seized. The shrine of St. Thomas was torn apart. The monks who had tended the candles of the Chandler's legend were scattered, their records hidden or burned. And yet, somehow, the light remained. A few of the townsfolk whispered that when the shrine was destroyed, a strange thing happened. The morning after, though the church was dark, one candle burned still upon a broken ledge. It gave no smoke, no scent of tallow, only a clean golden glow that would not be extinguished. The soldiers tried to snuff it out, but the flame merely bowed, as though in patience. Only when the sunlight streamed through the shattered windows did it fade of its own accord, leaving behind a faint sweetness in the air, like honey and old timber. One soldier, a young man from Kent named William Taverner, took the stub of that candle with him when he left. Years later his granddaughter, Anne, found it among his belongings, still whole, its wick untouched. She was a quiet woman, a weaver by trade, and during the cold winters of Queen Elizabeth's reign, when her loom froze and her hands stiffened, she would place that candle upon the sill and swear that its wax grew warm, though it never burned. She passed it to her son, then to his daughter, and in each generation the same quiet wonder followed. The candle did not age, did not melt, it merely waited. Meanwhile, Canterbury itself was remade. The pilgrims' inns became alehouses, the cloisters filled with schoolboys instead of monks. But even in this new world of merchants and scholars, the story of the candlemaker refused to fade. It was told now as an old superstition, something to amuse children, or whispered in winter when the lamps burned low. They said he had made a candle so pure that no flame could destroy it, that he had poured his breath into the wax, that his soul, bound to the craft of light, wandered still, seeking the perfect wick that would never end. But among the scholars who came to the cathedral library in those years, there were a few who took the legend seriously. One such man was Master Nicholas Cawdrey, a fellow of Cambridge who studied the nature of fire and light. He spent a whole summer in Canterbury, poring over every old record, searching for mention of John the Chandler. In a forgotten drawer of the Guildhall, he found a parchment brittle with age. It was a receipt, simple, unremarkable, dated 1348. It read, "To John the Candlemaker, for wax and wicks in service of the vigil of St. Alphege, 4 shillings and 2 pence." And below the mark of payment, a faint impression of a honeybee. Cawdrey stared at it for a long time. Then, against his usual reason, he took a candle of pure beeswax, melted it carefully, and pressed it over the seal to take an impression. When he lifted the wax, a soft sound seemed to rise, not from the paper, but from the air itself. A low, steady hum, like the echo of a breath. He wrote in his journal that night, "There is something in the wax which is not wholly silent." That phrase haunted him for years. Cawdrey published a short tract on the mystery of memory in materials, the notion that certain substances might hold the impressions of sound or warmth, much as wax holds shape. His peers mocked him, but his words survived, tucked into the footnotes of larger works, until centuries later they would be read again by men who studied sound, vibration, and light. They would call it resonance. But Cawdrey, in his quiet time, called it something simpler. He called it the breath of the Maker. One evening, late in his life, he visited Canterbury once more. The cathedral had changed again, its walls patched, its windows replaced, but the air still carried that faint sweetness when the candles were lit. He sat in a pew and thought he heard the faintest humming, gentle, rhythmic, patient. He smiled, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Still working, are you?" The next morning, the verger found him seated there, peaceful and still, his notebook open beside him. On its last page he had written, "Light remembers those who give it shape." The candle he had carried burned for 2 nights after his death without a drop of wax spilled. And so, through the centuries of faith and reform, of kings and scholars, the story endured, always changing, always the same. By the 17th century, When England's streets filled with the smoke of new lamps and the hum of trade, travelers to Canterbury still spoke of a strange warmth that lingered near the cathedral gates. Sailors passing through claimed they saw, in foggy weather, a glow that moved beside them down the street, soft as a lantern's light but without any visible source. An innkeeper's ledger from 1629 records that one guest, a merchant from Calais, left payment for his room with the note, "Tell the candle maker I am grateful. His light saw me safely through the storm." The innkeeper, puzzled, said he'd no candle maker in service. The merchant insisted. "He came to my door when the wind broke my lamp," he said. "An old man, silent, carrying a taper. He touched it to the wick, and it flamed again. When I looked up to thank him, he was gone." The innkeeper laughed, thinking it a dream brought on by drink, but when he entered the guest's room later, he found a faint scent of honey lingering in the cold air. And so it went, each generation finding its own small brush with the mystery. A child who dreamed of light in a dark, fevered night. A craftsman whose candles burned clean though his wax was poor. A traveler who saw a flicker at the end of a fogged lane and followed it home. Always the same warmth. Always the same hum, faint and tender as breath. No one knew why it lingered. Perhaps it was simply that the candle maker had poured too much patience into his work, and the world could not forget him. Or perhaps, in the endless rhythm of melting and shaping, cooling and kindling, something eternal had found a place to rest. And still, in the oldest parts of Canterbury, those who walked alone after dark sometimes saw, through mist or frost, a dim golden light that moved slowly between the walls. Steady, human, unhurried. Those who dared to follow it swore they heard a sound, barely there but real, a soft humming, and the faint crackle of cooling wax. By the time the 18th century dawned, Canterbury had become a town of commerce and scholars, its streets lined with stone and brick, and its markets alive with foreign goods and voices from distant lands. Yet, for those who knew where to look, the traces of the old chandler's work persisted in quiet corners, on the lintel of a forgotten shop, in the faint fragrance of wax behind an unused altar, and in stories whispered from one generation to the next. It was in 1712 that a young apprentice named Jonathan Halloway first heard the legend of John the Candlemaker in a meaningful way. He had been assigned to clean the cathedral vaults, a tedious task that left him alone for hours, his mind wandering. One day, while sweeping near a forgotten stone niche, he found a candle stub half buried in dust. Its wax was pale, smooth, and somehow warm to the touch, though the air was winter cold. Jonathan, like most in his generation, had grown up with lanterns and oil lamps. Wax candles were still used, but they were functional, not sacred. Yet he felt something stir in the presence of this simple stub. A memory, perhaps, not his own, but of someone else's care, patience, and devotion. He carried the stub to his master, Mr. Frederick Trowbridge, a respected candlemaker who had learned the trade from his father. Mr. Trowbridge inspected it with trained eyes. He frowned. "This wax. It should have hardened and cracked decades ago. But it is soft, almost alive." "Alive?" Jonathan asked. "Perhaps it remembers the hand that made it," his master replied. He was silent for a long moment. "Or perhaps it remembers something else entirely." The apprentice didn't speak again that evening. Instead, he watched the stub as it rested on the workbench, its faint warmth radiating like the echo of sunlight. Later, alone in the workshop, he struck a spark. The wick caught immediately. The flame was steady, golden, and strong, not flickering, not dancing with drafts. Jonathan stared, mesmerized. He felt as if the room itself held its breath. For hours he watched the candle burn, noting every detail. How the flame leaned slightly toward him as though acknowledging his presence, how the wax dripped in soft, golden beads, and how the faint scent of honey rose into the air, warm and comforting. When he finally extinguished it, the stub remained whole, its wick intact. Jonathan understood then that this was no ordinary candle. He felt a strange mix of awe and responsibility. Word of the candle spread quietly among the guild. Mr. Trowbridge, who had seen many unusual things in his lifetime, warned his apprentices, "Do not speak of it outside these walls. It is a gift and a burden. To handle it is to touch patience itself." Jonathan obeyed, but curiosity gnawed at him. He began to study the old techniques, seeking clues in old guild ledgers, letters, and fragments of parchment he found tucked away in the candle-making room. One document, almost entirely faded, bore the words, "In every dip, a heartbeat. In every flame, a memory." He memorized these words and began practicing the same rhythm, dipping wicks slowly, evenly, and without haste. Every evening, he felt as if John the candlemaker's presence guided his hands. And sometimes, late at night, he thought he heard the soft hum, low and melodic, echoing in the workshop. As years passed, Jonathan became known for candles unlike any others in Canterbury. They burned cleaner, lasted longer, and carried a faint sweetness in their light that soothed the weary. People whispered that the spirit of the old chandler still worked through him, though Jonathan never claimed it. He merely dipped, cooled, and repeated the process, patient as ever, as if every candle contained a fragment of time itself. It was during this period that the historian Elias Marsh visited Canterbury, a man of careful notes and meticulous observation. He had read accounts of John the candlemaker and came to see for himself. Jonathan allowed him into the workshop. Marsh saw the beeswax stubs, the iron cauldron, and the rows of dipping rods, each meticulously maintained. Then Jonathan lit a candle. Marsh described the moment later in his diary. The flame was not a flame, not in the way one expects. It was light itself made tangible, golden and steady. The scent of beeswax filled the room and seemed to settle into my chest. I felt, though I cannot explain how, as if the candle knew I was there, as if it had remembered my arrival before I had entered. Marsh later wrote that even after leaving the workshop, he carried the memory of the flame with him. When he lit ordinary candles, they seemed dull, ordinary. Only in the presence of John the candlemaker's wax, or Jonathan's careful reproductions, did the true warmth return. By the mid-1700s, the legend had spread further. Travelers, merchants, and even scholars came to Canterbury hoping for a glimpse of the miraculous light. But Jonathan was cautious. Only those who approached with quiet hearts and respect were allowed near the workshop. Others, eager for profit or fame, left empty-handed, frustrated by the stubbornly ordinary appearance of the candles. Still, the small flickers of golden light touched lives in subtle ways. It was said that in the dead of winter, when snow blanketed the streets and homes were dark, a single candle from Jonathan's shop could fill a room with warmth. Children slept better, the sick felt steadier, and the weary rested more peacefully. And as before, the candles themselves held a secret memory. The slow, deliberate care of a man who had learned centuries ago that to create light was to honor patience, the passage of time, and the quiet rhythm of life. In Canterbury, even as the centuries turned, the story endured. Not in grand chronicles, but in the quiet hum of wax melting, in the faint scent of honey, and in the golden glow that reminded each new generation that light, once made, never truly dies. The 18th century slowly gave way to the 19th, and Canterbury, like much of England, began to change under the weight of industry. Coal smoke darkened the skies. New roads carried carriages faster than any horse could trot a century before, and the rhythms of medieval life were long forgotten. Yet in one quiet lane near the cathedral, the story of the candlemaker endured, carried by the small, patient glow of wax. It was in 1824 that a young apothecary's assistant named Margaret Linwood first encountered the legend in earnest. She had grown up hearing her grandmother speak of miraculous candles, though Margaret had dismissed them as old wives' tales. But one winter evening, while delivering herbs to a parish on the outskirts of the town, she found herself in front of a small, shuttered building, the last remnant of the old guild quarter. A faint golden light flickered behind the dusty windows. Curious and cautious, she knocked. No answer came. The door oddly was ajar. Stepping inside, she found a small workshop frozen in time. Iron cauldrons, dipping rods, and bundles of flax lay as though waiting for a hand to return. and on the table a single candle, tall and smooth, glowed faintly, though no flame burned it. Margaret reached out, and the wax felt warm beneath her fingers. She gasped softly, sensing something alive within it, as though the candle itself breathed. She did not understand how it could remain so, intact after centuries, nor why she felt suddenly aware of the hands that had made it. Later, in the warmth of her master's apothecary, she tried to light the candle, caught instantly steady and golden. Its light filled the room in a way that no lantern or lamp ever had. The scent of honey and warm wax wrapped around her like a memory she did not recall but somehow recognized. Margaret was captivated. She could not bring herself to extinguish it, yet knew she must. The candle burned through the night, and when she returned in the morning, the wax was intact, the wick untouched. She realized that the candle did not burn as ordinary candles did. It preserved itself, holding the glow, the memory, and the presence of its maker. Word spread slowly, quietly, among those who respected the old arts. Margaret kept a careful journal, recording her observations. How the candle seemed to respond to attention, how its warmth grew when held with patience, how the scent intensified when it was near those who approached with respect and humility. By 1840, she had mastered the rhythm of the candle's light. She began teaching a select few apprentices, those willing to honor the centuries-old methods, emphasizing patience above all else. A candle is not merely wax and wick, she would tell them. It is a memory of care. Each dip, each fold of the wick, each slow cooling, these are as important as the flame itself. Margaret's careful stewardship revived the guild's presence in Canterbury, though now more hidden, more mystical than ever. The guild no longer produced candles for the city's streets. Their work was quiet, private, almost sacred. Their customers came not to buy, but to witness the light that remembered. In 1851, a visitor from London arrived, a writer named Edward Farnsworth, who had heard rumors of candles that carried memory. He found Margaret's small workshop tucked between narrow brick houses, a faint glow spilling onto the cobbled street. Farnsworth was skeptical, but when Margaret lit one of the ancient candles, he was captivated. He wrote later in his notes, "It is as though the room itself breathes with the flame. The light is not simply illumination. It is presence, warmth, and memory intertwined. I have known many candles in my life, but none that spoke as this does across centuries." Farnsworth returned to London with a single candle, though Margaret warned him not to light it unless he approached with care and respect. He did not heed her advice, eager to see the miracle himself. When he struck a spark, the candle flared briefly, a sudden surge of golden light, then settled into a steady, calm glow. But he reported that he felt watched, though no one was present. The flame seemed aware, almost sentient, as though carrying the essence of a maker long gone. By the mid-19th century, the legend of the candle maker had grown in reach. Travelers wrote of small glows in the streets of Canterbury, of candles burning far longer than they should, of rooms warmed and comforted by an invisible presence. Scholars debated whether the phenomenon was superstition or something deeper. Candle makers began experimenting, trying to reproduce the ancient method, but none succeeded. Only those who honored the slow, patient rhythm of dipping and cooling ever came close. Margaret Linwood passed away in 1867, leaving her journals and a single candle to a trusted apprentice. She instructed that the candle be preserved, never lit except in moments of true need, when its warmth and light could serve as a guide. And in the quiet of the workshop, the candle remained, pale and smooth, warm yet unburned, waiting for the hands that would carry the memory forward. Even as gaslights and oil lamps filled Canterbury, there were always those who sought the old glow. Children who wandered the cloisters at dusk swore they saw the softest flicker of golden light, moving among the stones as though searching for something lost. Scholars who studied the ancient texts felt a strange warmth when they opened Margaret's journals. Candle makers who stumbled upon the old techniques reported a rhythm in their work, a patience that seemed to originate from beyond their own hands. And always the hum, the faint melodic hum that could not be traced, persisted in quiet corners, carrying across the years the soft, steady presence of John the Candlemaker. In that era of steam and industry, when the world rushed forward with fire and smoke, the candles of Canterbury reminded all who saw them that time could be slow, that light made carefully could hold memory, that patience could preserve presence, and that even when hands grow weary and centuries pass, the rhythm of creation, gentle, deliberate, golden, never truly dies. The latter half of the 19th century saw Canterbury transform under the march of progress. Steam engines roared through the countryside. Railways carried merchants and travelers at speeds unimaginable to the candlemaker of old, and the streets grew brighter with the steady glow of gas lamps. Yet in the shadows of narrow alleys and cloisters, the echoes of the candlemaker's legacy endured, subtle and unyielding. It was 1874 when a young artist named Eleanor Whittingham first became aware of the legend. Eleanor had come to Canterbury seeking inspiration for her sketches of the cathedral and its quiet streets. One evening, while exploring the ruins of an old guild hall, she noticed a faint, golden glow behind a shuttered window. Curious, she peered inside and saw a small workshop, dust motes floating in the light. A single candle stood on a table, pale yet warm, as if it had never been lit. Eleanor felt a strange, almost magnetic pull. She pushed the door open and entered quietly. The smell of beeswax and honey filled the room, so soft and pure it seemed to wrap around her. The workshop was frozen in time. Cauldrons, dipping rods, bundles of flax, and stacks of wax blocks, all meticulously arranged as if waiting for the return of the maker. She reached for the candle, her fingers brushing the smooth wax. A warmth radiated through her hand, delicate yet insistent. She lit the wick, and the flame rose steadily, golden and unwavering. The room filled with a glow unlike any gaslight or oil lamp she had seen. It was soft, comforting and alive. Eleanor noticed the faint hum, subtle and melodic, as if the workshop itself was breathing along with the flame. She sat for hours sketching the candle, the tools, the workshop. Each stroke of her pencil seemed guided by an unseen hand. When she finally extinguished the flame, the stub remained intact, the wick unburned. She realized then that this was no ordinary light. It carried memory, presence, and patience across centuries. Eleanor returned the next day, and the day after, each visit revealing more of the workshop's quiet magic. She sketched the rows of dipping rods, the brass ladles, the iron cauldron. She tried to capture the warmth in her drawings, the soft hum that seemed to flow from the candle's wax, the subtle golden glow that lingered even after the flame was out. She began to study the old techniques, following instructions she found tucked into yellow journals left by Margaret Linwood. She learned the rhythm of dipping, the slow immersion into warm beeswax, the careful extraction, the cooling before the next layer. Each step required patience and reverence. She understood that the candle was not merely wax and wick. It was memory, painstakingly built layer by layer. Word of Eleanor's dedication spread quietly among the local artisans. Candle makers and apothecaries, skeptical at first, came to observe her work. They witnessed the strange glow that followed the candle, the honeyed scent that lingered in the air, and the steady hum that could not be explained. Some were frightened, others in awe. Eleanor, however, remained calm, patient, and meticulous, as if the centuries themselves had entrusted her with a secret too delicate to rush. In 1881, a young historian named Thomas Everard visited Eleanor's workshop. He had read fragments of old chronicles, tales of miraculous candles that burned without consuming themselves, and the patient hand of the candlemaker. Skeptical yet intrigued, he asked to see one of the ancient candles. Eleanor lit a stub preserved from the Linwood collection. Everard described the moment in his notes. The flame is not merely fire. It is a presence, golden and steady, alive with something beyond comprehension. I have studied countless texts, observed endless phenomena, yet nothing compares. There is a rhythm to the wax, a hum beneath the heat, as if the work of centuries is contained within a single flame. Eleanor watched quietly as Everard took careful notes. She could see the hum of understanding grow in his eyes, a dawning awareness that this was no superstition. It was the legacy of patient craft, of careful work, of a single maker's devotion remembered through time. That year, Eleanor's work attracted more attention, not from merchants seeking profit but from scholars and curious townsfolk. Some attempted to replicate her candles but failed. They rushed, hurried, and their flames sputtered and fell. Only those who approached with patience, reverence, and respect for the rhythm of the craft succeeded in coaxing the wax to remember. By the late 1880s, the legend had become woven into the fabric of Canterbury. Local children whispered about the golden light that sometimes glimmered through abandoned windows. Pilgrims and travelers spoke of warmth in the dead of night, of rooms touched by light that seemed to know them. Candle makers across the region began to speak in hushed tones of the old techniques, of layering with memory, and of the patience required to allow the wax to hold the hand of the maker across time. Eleanor continued her work for decades, preserving and teaching the rhythm, passing on the secret to carefully chosen apprentices. Each one was instructed in the slow, deliberate art of dipping and cooling, of coaxing warmth into wax without burning it, of listening to the faint hum that accompanied the light. Each apprentice understood that the candle maker's legacy was not in fame or wealth, but in presence, patience, and quiet persistence. Even as the industrial age surged forward, with gas lights, electricity, and mass production, the small golden glows in Eleanor's workshop remained untouched by time. They held memory. They carried the echo of hands long gone. And they reminded all who witnessed them that the simplest acts, done with care and attention, could endure far beyond the span of a single lifetime. In quiet moments, Eleanor would sit by the window, candle in hand, and imagine the centuries stretching back to John, the original candle maker. She felt connected to him through wax, wick, and flame, as if the rhythm of his work had never stopped, flowing unbroken through generations. And though the world around her rushed forward, the light remained steady, patient, golden, a heartbeat carried through time. As the 19th century waned and the 20th approached, Canterbury continued to modernize. Electric lights began to creep into the streets, gas lamps glimmered faintly beside railway stations, and the rhythms of medieval life were almost entirely forgotten. Yet, in hidden corners, the legacy of the candle maker endured, quietly resisting the rush of progress. It was 1902 when a scholar of antiquities, Dr. Leonard Fenton, arrived in Canterbury. He had studied centuries of guild records and ecclesiastical documents, and had heard whispers of a miraculous candle, preserved through generations. His curiosity was not for superstition, but for evidence, tangible proof of a craft that defied time. He sought out the last known apprentice of Eleanor Whittingham, a man named Samuel Aldridge. Samuel was now an elderly craftsman, his hands still steady from decades of candle making, though his back stooped and his eyes dimmed with age. When Fenton arrived at Samuel's workshop, he found a room heavy with the scent of beeswax, rows of dipping rods neatly arranged, and candles of every size and age carefully stored on shelves. Samuel welcomed him silently, and with a nod, lit a candle that had been in his care for over 30 years. The flame rose instantly, steady and golden, filling the room with warmth. Fenton was struck immediately by its presence. Not merely illumination, but a feeling of life. The scent of honey and wax seemed almost tangible, clinging to the air like a soft, invisible fabric. He watched, fascinated, as Samuel carefully demonstrated the rhythm of dipping, a slow immersion of the wick into warm beeswax, gentle extraction, cooling, and repetition. "Patience," Samuel murmured, "is the essence of all this. The candle remembers the hand that shapes it. It is not the wax alone, but the care, the rhythm, the quiet attention." Fenton made careful notes, observing how the candle's flame seemed to respond to touch and presence. He noted the faint, melodic hum that seemed to rise from the wax itself, a resonance not of sound, but of memory. "It is as if the flame carries centuries of work and care," he wrote later in his journal. "A single act of devotion, preserved in wax, becomes eternal." Samuel spoke little of the past, but he did recount the lineage. John, the original candle maker of Canterbury; Margaret Linwood, who preserved the secret; Eleanor Whittingham, who refined it for her time, and finally Samuel himself, the keeper of this quiet craft. Each had approached the work with reverence, understanding that the candle was not merely light, but memory, patience, and presence made tangible. By 1910, the legend had quietly persisted among collectors, scholars, and candlemakers who valued the old ways. Some dismissed it as folklore, yet those who handled the wax and witnessed the flame knew differently. There was a truth beyond explanation, carried in the golden glow and the faint scent of honey. Fenton himself would later write, "I have studied many phenomena, but none like this. The candle does not burn in the conventional sense. It is alive with memory, preserving the touch of generations of craftsmen. The flame is steady, not from fuel alone, but from the care that shaped it. There is wisdom in patience, preserved layer by layer, century by century." The workshop continued to function in quiet secrecy. Samuel Aldridge trained a select few apprentices, ensuring the legacy would survive even as the world changed. Electric lights and mass-produced candles surrounded Canterbury, yet in those hidden corners, the old flame endured. It reminded all who encountered it that care and patience could outlast time itself. During the First World War, the town changed further. Many of Samuel's apprentices were called to serve, leaving the workshop almost empty. Yet even during the darkest nights, the candles endured, their soft glow reaching into the homes and streets near the cathedral. Soldiers writing letters home described warmth in the cold, a golden light in the midst of shadows, though they could not name its source. After the war, the surviving apprentices returned, bringing with them tales of destruction, loss, and survival. Samuel, now nearing 90, continued to guide them, emphasizing that the rhythm of the craft, the careful dips, the patient cooling, the quiet respect, was what preserved the candle's secret. By 1920, Samuel passed quietly in his sleep, leaving the workshop to his last apprentice, a young woman named Clara Whitmore. She had studied the rhythm of the work for years, her hands steady and patient, her mind attentive to the slightest detail. She inherited the candles, the dipping rods, the iron cauldrons, and the lineage that had persisted for nearly 6 centuries. Clara understood the gravity of her inheritance. She knew that the candlemaker's legacy was not just about wax and wick, but about memory and patience, about presence and devotion carried across centuries. She maintained the workshop with reverence, ensuring that the candles remained intact, their wicks unburned, their golden glow ready to guide those who approached with care. In quiet moments, Clara would light a candle alone, feeling the warmth of centuries in her hands. She felt the faint hum, soft and steady, rising from the wax. And she often imagined John the candlemaker, dipping wicks in his own small workshop, humming softly, guiding every layer of wax with patience and care. The story endured not in grand chronicles or histories, but in the gentle glow of light, the faint scent of beeswax, and the hum that could not be traced but was always present. Across 6 centuries, the rhythm had persisted, slow, deliberate, golden, and eternal. The interwar years brought Canterbury both change and continuity. The streets grew quieter at night with the rise of electric lamps, yet in certain alleys and behind ancient walls, the golden glow of beeswax candles still appeared, inexplicable, steadfast, and warm. Clara Whitmore's workshop became a quiet sanctuary for those who sought the old rhythms. Artists, scholars, and candlemakers who revered patience above all else. By 1932, Clara had perfected the process of layering wax, maintaining wicks, and nurturing the faint hum that seemed to arise naturally from the work. She had inherited not only the techniques of her predecessors, John, Margaret, Eleanor, and Samuel, but also their philosophy. Light was more than illumination, it was memory made tangible. One evening, as rain fell softly on the cobblestones outside, a young musician named Henry Rook entered the workshop. He had heard rumors of a candle whose light carried presence, warmth, and calm, and he was skeptical. Clara allowed him to witness the process but warned him, "Do not touch the wax unless you are prepared to be patient. The candle remembers the hand that touches it." Henry observed quietly as Clara carefully dipped a new wick into warm beeswax, slowly lifting it and allowing it to cool before the next layer. Each motion was deliberate, measured, and rhythmic. As the final dip was completed, Clara placed the candle on a small stand and lit it. The flame rose steadily, golden and soft, illuminating the workshop with a warmth that seemed to pulse gently. Henry gasped. The light was unlike any he had ever seen. It seemed almost alive, responding subtly to their presence. The faint honeyed scent filled the room, mingling with the sound of the rain outside. And beneath it all, there was the hum, a quiet, melodic vibration that could not be traced to any physical source but resonated in the very air. "Do you hear it?" Clara asked softly. Henry nodded, his eyes wide. It feels like it's alive," he whispered. Clara smiled gently. "It remembers. Every layer, every dip, every breath you bring to the wax is held in patience. This is why the light endures. This is why the candle maker's work has lasted centuries." Henry left the workshop that night with a small candle Clara allowed him to carry. He placed it on his music desk at home, lighting it during practice. He found that the light not only illuminated his sheet music but seemed to inspire his playing. Notes flowed more smoothly, rhythms came more naturally, and a calmness settled over him that he could not explain. Word of Clara's candles spread quietly throughout Canterbury. Artists, musicians, and scholars would visit, drawn not by superstition but by the subtle, enduring quality of the light. Many tried to reproduce the effect in ordinary workshops but failed. Those who rushed or lacked patience found their flames flickering or sputtering, their wax imperfect. Only those who approached with care, attention, and respect could coax the memory of the maker into the light. By the late 1930s, as the world edged toward war once more, Clara's workshop had become a quiet refuge. Locals would whisper that if one were lost in the foggy streets at night, a small golden glow might appear, leading the way, warm and steady. Soldiers, travelers, and townsfolk all told tales of lights that burned with a gentle, persistent glow, guiding weary feet or offering comfort in the darkness. In 1939, when the Second World War began, Clara's workshop faced new challenges. Candles were in high demand due to blackouts, but she refused to mass-produce them, knowing that haste would ruin the delicate balance of memory and patience. Instead, she focused on preserving the old candles and training a few apprentices in the careful, deliberate techniques that had been passed down for nearly 6 centuries. Despite the chaos outside, the workshop remained a constant. Every evening, Clara and her apprentices lit the candles, their flames golden and steady. The hum persisted, faint yet perceptible, and the scent of honeyed beeswax filled the air. Even the youngest apprentice, who had never seen the legend, felt the presence of the centuries past. Clara often reflected on the lineage she had inherited. She imagined John, the original candle maker, carefully dipping his wicks in 14th century Canterbury. She thought of Margaret Linwood, Eleanor Whittingham, and Samuel Aldridge, each maintaining the rhythm, each preserving the secret. And now it was her turn, alone in a world hurtling forward with electricity, war, and industrialization. The legacy was heavy, yet sacred. During the Blitz, the town of Canterbury was spared the worst of the bombing, but blackouts and fear were constant. People sought comfort in familiar patterns. Those who knew of Clara's candles whispered of golden lights moving along quiet streets, and some even swore that the warmth seemed to reach into homes, offering hope. Through it all, Clara continued her work, maintaining the rhythm, the patience, and the memory embedded in wax. She knew that the candle was not merely flame, but a conduit of centuries of human care and quiet devotion. And though the world outside raged and changed, the little workshop on the quiet street remained a place where light, memory, and presence intertwined. It was a rhythm that no war, no progress, no passing year could disrupt, a golden heartbeat through time. The early 1940s were a time of uncertainty and fear in Canterbury, yet within Clara Whitmore's workshop, a quiet ritual endured. The rhythm of dipping wicks, melting beeswax, and layering each candle continued, uninterrupted by air raids or rationing. To Clara, every movement was deliberate, a bridge connecting the centuries. John, Margaret, Eleanor, Samuel, and now herself. Each candle was more than light. It was memory, patience, and the enduring touch of hands long gone. Clara's apprentices had dwindled during the war. Some had been drafted, others displaced. Still, a small few remained, drawn not by fame or profit but by reverence for the work. Among them was a young woman named Lillian Ashford, who had first entered the workshop in 1941 at the age of 16. Lillian had heard stories whispered in schoolyards about the golden candle, but seeing it in person filled her with awe. The first night she lit a candle under Clara's guidance, she felt a warmth that went beyond physical heat. The glow seemed to fill her chest and calm her racing thoughts. The honeyed scent of beeswax wrapped around her like a soft cloak, and a faint hum, steady and melodic, rose from the flame. Lillian realized that this light was alive in a way ordinary candles could never be. Clara watched quietly. "Do not rush," she said softly. "The candle remembers patience, not haste. It remembers the hand that tends it, and the heart that respects it. Every layer carries centuries of care. That is why it endures." Lillian repeated the rhythm again and again. Dip, lift, cool, repeat. She learned to move slowly, deliberately, as though her own heartbeat could guide the wax. By the end of her first week, she could feel the hum even without the candle lit, a subtle resonance of presence, patience, and memory that lingered in the workshop air. In 1943, a local historian, Professor Alfred Keaton, came to Canterbury seeking information about the medieval guilds. He heard of Clara's workshop and requested a private viewing. Clara allowed him inside, and he observed as she demonstrated the careful dipping of a wick into warm beeswax. The candle's flame rose steadily, its golden glow filling the room and radiating a warmth that seemed almost human. Keaton later wrote in his notes, "The light is extraordinary. It does not flicker in the drafts of a world at war. It carries a presence that feels ancient, deliberate, and patient. One senses that centuries of human hands and devotion are contained within its wax. It is not merely a flame, it is memory incarnate." The wartime years were difficult, but the workshop became a sanctuary. Soldiers on leave, families enduring blackouts, and townsfolk seeking comfort all spoke of glimpsing the golden light from Clara's windows. Those who witnessed it described a warmth that reached their hearts, a calm that defied the chaos outside, and a faint hum that seemed to whisper patience and resilience. Clara trained Lillian meticulously, emphasizing that the candle was not simply a tool for light, but a conduit of centuries of careful craft. "Each dip is a heartbeat," Clara said. "Each layer is a moment remembered. To rush is to lose the memory. To respect the wax is to honor all who came before." By 1945, when the war drew to a close, Lillian had become proficient. She could maintain the hum in the workshop even when the candles were unlit. She understood the delicate balance between wax, wick, heat, and attention, and she could feel the centuries-old presence of John, Margaret, Eleanor, Samuel, and Clara herself guiding her hands. Even as Canterbury rebuilt and modernized, the golden light persisted in quiet corners. Children whispered of it in foggy streets. Artists and musicians sought its gentle warmth. Scholars debated its origin, yet those who witnessed the glow understood that it was something beyond explanation. Clara grew older, her hands less steady, her eyes dimmer, yet her voice remained soft and full of authority. She entrusted the workshop fully to Lillian, confident that the legacy would endure. Lillian maintained the rhythm, preserved the wax, and carried forward the subtle hum that had guided generations. In the late 1940s, with electricity becoming widespread and mass-produced candles flooding the market, Lillian understood that the work was more essential than ever. Ordinary flames could illuminate rooms, but they could not carry memory or patience. The golden glow of the candlemaker's legacy reminded all who encountered it that light was more than fire. It was presence, care, and history preserved in wax. And so, through the turbulent years, the quiet rhythm of the workshop endured. Every dip, every layer, every gentle hum connected the past to the present, guiding those who approached with patience and respect. The light remained golden, steady, and alive, a testament to centuries of devotion, a bridge across generations. Even as the world outside surged forward with new technology, new dangers and new distractions, the little workshop in Canterbury remained a place where time slowed, where light carried memory, where patience, care, and reverence for the past persisted. And in the hum of the wax, faint but unwavering, one could feel the heartbeat of the candle maker himself, still present, still patient, still watching over the golden glow that had endured for centuries. The 1950s brought a quieter Canterbury, a town adjusting to peace after decades of war. Streets were brighter, electric lights replaced flickering gas lamps, and the hum of progress could be heard in every corner. Yet in a narrow lane near the cathedral, behind an unassuming brick facade, the legacy of the candle maker continued, preserved in Clara Whitmore's old workshop and carried forward by her apprentice, Lillian Ashford. Lillian, now in her 30s, had taken full responsibility for the workshop. The rhythm of candle making, the dipping of wicks into warm beeswax, the slow lifting and cooling, the patient layering, was no longer simply technique. It was ritual. Each candle was a vessel of centuries, carrying memory, presence, and the faint hum that marked the passage of generations. She maintained the old journals, Eleanor Whittingham's sketches, Margaret Linwood's careful notes, and Samuel Aldridge's observations. They guided her hands, reminding her that the candle maker's work was not merely functional, but sacred. "Every layer is patience," she often said to herself. "Every dip is a heartbeat remembered." In 1953, a young journalist named Peter Hawthorne visited Canterbury. He had heard whispers of a candle whose light endured beyond reason, and whose warmth carried a strange, almost living presence. He was skeptical but curious, hoping for a human story rather than supernatural marvel. Lillian allowed him to observe, lighting a candle carefully preserved from Eleanor's era. The flame rose steady and golden. Peter noticed immediately how different it was from ordinary candles. The glow seemed softer, almost alive, the scent of beeswax and honey delicate yet unmistakable. And then he heard it, a faint hum, steady and melodic, emanating not from the flame itself but from the wax, the wick, the very air surrounding it. Peter wrote later in his notes, "It is not merely light. It is presence. It is patience and history, carried quietly in wax. One cannot rush it, cannot force it. The candle has a rhythm, a heartbeat, that speaks across centuries. I cannot explain it, yet I felt it, deeply." Word of the candles spread quietly among scholars, artists, and musicians who valued the subtle magic of patience. Unlike the electric lamps that illuminated streets and homes, these candles offered something intangible: calm, warmth, and a connection to human devotion across centuries. People came to Canterbury seeking this quiet illumination, finding a golden glow waiting patiently in Lillian's workshop. By the late 1950s, Lillian began training a new apprentice, Margaret Finch, a young woman of gentle demeanor and patient hands. Lillian passed down the careful techniques, the rhythm of dipping and cooling, and the reverent understanding that every layer of wax carried memory. "This is not merely craft," she instructed. "This is a conversation across time, with those who came before us. Treat it gently." Margaret learned quickly, guided by Lillian's patient instruction. She discovered that the candles responded not to haste or force but to deliberate attention. The wax seemed almost sentient, the flame steady, and the faint hum persistent. She realized that each candle was alive in its own quiet way, a repository of human care and history. During this period, the world outside Canterbury changed rapidly. Television, modern appliances, and electric lighting filled homes, and the pace of life accelerated. Yet in the quiet workshop, time seemed suspended. The hum, the golden glow, and the scent of beeswax carried the rhythm of centuries, reminding all who entered that patience and care were enduring. In 1961, a visiting historian, Professor Jonathan Cartwright, documented Lillian's work. He was meticulous, recording the layering techniques, the dipping process, and even the faint vibrations of the wax itself. His notes emphasized what many skeptics overlooked. These candles were not merely decorative. They were vessels of memory, shaped by human devotion and preserved across centuries through careful attention. Cartwright wrote, "To witness the work is to sense a heartbeat not your own. The candle hums quietly, as if aware of its maker and observer alike. It teaches patience, presence, and reverence for history in ways no text or image can convey. It is a living bridge across generations." Even as the decades passed, Lillian ensured that the rhythm remained unchanged. She and Margaret worked in silence, observing the golden light, feeling the hum, and inhaling the faint scent of honeyed wax. They knew that rushing or distraction would break the delicate chain, that the candle maker's legacy demanded respect, patience, and care. By 1965, the story of the candle maker had quietly reached international audiences through letters, journals, and the few who visited the workshop. Yet the secret remained intact. Only those willing to approach the craft with attention and reverence could unlock the flame's true presence. Ordinary candles might illuminate a room, but only these candles carried centuries of memory and quiet devotion. In the late 1960s, Lillian's health began to decline. She prepared Margaret to take full responsibility for the workshop, confident that she could continue the legacy. Margaret, now skilled in the rhythm of dipping, lifting, and cooling, understood the importance of patience, the hum, and the golden glow. She could feel the centuries of care flowing through her hands, connecting her to John, Margaret Linwood, Eleanor, Samuel, and Lillian herself. Even as Canterbury modernized and life rushed forward, the workshop remained a haven. The candles burned steady, the hum persisted, and the scent of beeswax carried through the small room. Here, the rhythm of centuries continued, a reminder that light, memory, and patience endure when nurtured with care. And as Margaret prepared to carry the work forward alone, she felt the weight and wonder of the generations before her, the steady presence of the candle maker, and the quiet, golden heartbeat of the light itself. The 1970s arrived with Canterbury much changed. Cars now rattled along cobbled streets, television sets glowed in homes, and modern conveniences seemed to sweep away traces of the past. Yet behind a narrow brick facade near the cathedral, the golden glow of the candle maker's legacy endured, carefully preserved by Margaret Finch. Margaret, now in her 40s, had fully taken over the workshop after Lillian's passing. She moved deliberately through her days, observing the rhythm of candle making that had been passed down through centuries. Every wick dipped, every layer of wax cooled, every candle aligned on the shelves was part of a long, unbroken chain stretching back to John, the first candle maker of Canterbury. The workshop itself seemed suspended in time. Dust motes floated in the golden glow, iron cauldrons gleamed faintly, and the faint hum of memory lingered in the air. Visitors who glimpsed the light often spoke of a warmth that extended beyond the physical, a sense that someone or something was present, watching over them. Margaret trained a young apprentice named Helen Cartwright, a quiet, observant girl with steady hands and a deep curiosity. Helen arrived in the workshop in 1972, fascinated by the stories she had heard of golden light that carried memory. Margaret guided her carefully, insisting on patience above all else. "Rushing destroys the memory," Margaret explained one evening. "The wax holds time, attention, and care. Each dip, each layer is a heartbeat. If you move too quickly, you lose the rhythm, and the candle forgets." Helen listened, watching as Margaret dipped the wick into warm beeswax, lifted it slowly, and allowed it to cool before the next layer. The golden glow of the finished candle rose steadily, its flame soft yet alive. The faint hum persisted, filling the workshop with an almost imperceptible melody, a resonance that could only be felt by those who approached with quiet attention. During the 1970s, scholars and artists occasionally visited Canterbury to witness the phenomenon. Margaret allowed only those who approached respectfully, warning that haste or curiosity without care would disrupt the delicate chain. Those who observed often remarked that the candle seemed to respond to presence, almost sentient in its patience. One scholar, Dr. Evelyn Moore, described it in her notes. "The light is not merely illumination. It is history, preserved in wax." The rhythm of its creation carries centuries of care. One feels the hands of the makers guiding it still, teaching patience and devotion. It is both comfort and lesson, a presence that transcends explanation. Margaret continued to maintain the workshop as it had been for generations. Quiet, deliberate, and steeped in memory. Candles were not sold for profit. They were preserved, created, and shared with those who understood their significance. Ordinary candles might serve practical purposes, but only these golden lights carried history, presence, and the faint hum of centuries. Helen's skill grew steadily under Margaret's guidance. She learned not only the technique but the philosophy, that patience, care, and attention were more important than speed or volume. Every candle she completed carried the memory of John, Margaret Linwood, Eleanor Whittingham, Samuel Aldridge, Lillian Ashford, and now Margaret herself. The hum seemed to rise stronger when Helen approached with respect, as though the legacy acknowledged her dedication. In the late 1970s, a minor exhibition in Canterbury included photographs of the workshop and the golden light of the candles. Margaret was cautious, allowing only a few visitors, but the images spread quietly, sparking curiosity in those interested in history, craft, and subtle forms of artistry. Yet no reproduction, photograph, or description could fully capture the presence and warmth of the flame. Only those who approached the workshop in person could sense the hum, the memory, and the quiet heartbeat of centuries. Margaret often reflected on the lineage. She imagined John in his humble 14th century shop, humming softly as he dipped wicks into warm beeswax. She pictured Margaret Linwood preserving the techniques for posterity, Eleanor refining them with care, Samuel maintaining the rhythm, and Lillian keeping the golden glow alive through war. Now it was her turn. The responsibility weighed heavily, but the light itself seemed to offer reassurance, steady and patient, golden and unwavering. By the end of the decade, Helen was ready to take on more responsibility. Margaret knew her time in the workshop was limited, and she entrusted Helen with not only the technique but the understanding that the candle was a vessel of memory, patience, and presence. "This work is not yours alone," Margaret told her one evening. "It belongs to centuries of hands, hearts, and minds. Treat it gently, and it will endure." Even as the world grew faster, filled with machines and electric lights, the quiet workshop remained a sanctuary. Golden flames flickered steadily in the shadowed corners, the faint hum persisted, and the scent of honeyed beeswax wrapped around those who entered. The rhythm of centuries continued, teaching patience, care, and respect to anyone willing to observe and learn. And in the soft golden glow, one could still feel the presence of the first candle maker, John, guiding the hand of each new apprentice, reminding them that light, memory, and devotion are timeless. The 1980s brought new changes to Canterbury, yet the small workshop tucked near the cathedral remained untouched by time. Helen Cartwright now managed the candlemaker's legacy, her hands skilled, her mind attentive, and her heart aligned with centuries of careful practice. The rhythm of candle making, the dipping, lifting, cooling, layering, continued as it had for hundreds of years, preserving memory, patience, and presence in golden wax. Helen trained a young apprentice named Clara Simmons, named coincidentally after Lillian Whitmore, bridging the lineage across generations. Clara was curious, observant, and patient, qualities essential for maintaining the rhythm. Helen emphasized that the candle's magic, or rather its preservation of memory, was not a mystical power, but the result of devotion, care, and deliberate attention. One evening, Helen lit a candle that had been preserved since Margaret Finch's era. The flame rose steadily, golden and warm, illuminating the workshop with a calm, steady light. The scent of beeswax and honey filled the air, and the faint hum of memory rose in resonance with their presence. "This is the rhythm you must learn," Helen told Clara softly. "It is slow, deliberate, and patient. Each dip carries centuries of care. The candle is not just wax and wick. It is history preserved in light." Clara watched attentively, replicating the motions as Helen guided her. She learned the importance of the pause, the moment between dipping and lifting, allowing the wax to cool, to settle, to remember. Each layer became more than technique. It became connection to the hands that had come before hers, to the heartbeat of the candle maker across centuries. By the mid-1980s, the story of Canterbury's candle maker had begun to circulate beyond the town, appearing in obscure journals of historical craft, small magazine articles, and letters from travelers who had glimpsed the golden glow. Many were skeptical, yet those who approached with care and respect found themselves captivated by the warmth, the hum, and the patient, steady flame. Helen continued to preserve the lineage meticulously. She refused to mass-produce, sell widely, or commercialize the candles. They were not commodities. They were vessels of memory, carefully layered, their wicks unburned, waiting for the hands that understood patience. Ordinary candles could illuminate a room, but only these golden lights carried centuries of human attention, devotion, and care. In 1987, a visiting historian, Dr. Samuel Leighton, came to Canterbury seeking records of medieval craft guilds. Helen allowed him to observe, explaining the rhythm without revealing every secret. Dr. Leighton was captivated not by the flame alone, but by the presence it seemed to carry. A subtle, almost imperceptible life in the glow. He wrote in his notes, "It is difficult to explain. The candle does not merely burn. It breathes history. One feels the hands of makers long gone, the patience and care embedded in wax, the faint hum of continuity. This is craft as preservation, light as memory." Clara continued her apprenticeship, learning to feel the hum even when the candle was unlit. She understood that the workshop's true lesson was patience, reverence, and attention. The candles were teachers, the golden light a language of centuries, speaking softly to those willing to listen. Even as the 1980s drew toward the digital age, the workshop remained a quiet sanctuary. The golden glow flickered steadily in shadowed corners, the faint hum persisted, and the smell of beeswax wrapped around anyone who entered, a reminder that the rhythm of centuries was alive, waiting, and enduring. Helen often reflected on the lineage. John, the first candle maker; Margaret Linwood, preserving the craft; Eleanor Whittingham, refining it; Samuel Aldridge, maintaining it through war; Lillian Ashford, carrying it forward; Margaret Finch, preserving it in the modern age. And now her and Clara, entrusted with centuries of care, attention, and history. As the decade waned, Helen realized that the world outside had grown faster, louder, and less patient, but the workshop's rhythm remained unbroken. The candles, carefully layered, continued to preserve memory and presence. Even the hum seemed stronger, responding to Clara's attentive hands, acknowledging a new generation ready to continue the lineage. The small, quiet workshop in Canterbury reminded all who entered that light, memory, and patience are timeless. That even in a world rushing forward, some things endure, slowly, deliberately, golden and alive. The 1990s brought new changes to Canterbury. Streets were brighter, filled with cars and neon signs, and the world moved faster than ever before. Yet in a quiet lane, the small workshop of the candle maker remained a sanctuary. Golden light glowed steadily in the shadows, filling the room with warmth, the faint hum of memory vibrating softly in the air. The centuries-old rhythm, dipping, lifting, cooling, layering, continued, preserved by Clara Simmons under the careful guidance of Helen Cartwright. Clara, now grown, understood fully the responsibility of her apprenticeship. Each candle she created was more than wax and wick. It carried the hands, the patience, and the devotion of generations. She could feel John, Margaret Linwood, Eleanor Whittingham, Samuel Aldridge, Lillian Ashford, Margaret Finch, and Helen herself flowing through her movements, a living lineage connecting the past to the present. One rainy evening, a visitor arrived, a young historian named Daniel Whitaker. He had read fragments of accounts about the golden candles, their steady hum, and the soft honeyed scent. Skeptical yet intrigued, he requested to witness the creation firsthand. Clara led him quietly through the workshop, where rows of candles gleamed softly, untouched by age, their golden light steady and alive. She demonstrated the rhythm, dipping the wick into warm beeswax, lifting it slowly, allowing it to cool, layering patiently, each movement deliberate. Daniel watched in awe as the candle was lit. Its flame rose steadily, golden and warm, illuminating the room without flicker, radiating a presence that could not be measured by ordinary light. "The candle carries memory," Clara said softly. "It remembers patience, attention, and care. Each layer preserves centuries of work and devotion. Only those who approach it gently can understand its rhythm." Daniel nodded, sensing the quiet power in the glow. The faint hum rose, delicate yet steady, vibrating in the very air. He noticed how the scent of beeswax and honey lingered, a tangible reminder of time, labor, and presence. In that moment, he understood that the candlemaker's legacy was not about fame, wealth, or spectacle. It was about connection, continuity, and quiet devotion passed from hand to hand across centuries. Clara continued to guide Daniel and her apprentices through the careful techniques, emphasizing patience, mindfulness, and respect for the rhythm of the work. The golden light seemed to respond to their presence, steady and alive, carrying memory and history in every flicker. By the late 1990s, the world outside had grown faster still. Electricity, technology, and modernity filled homes, streets, and minds. But the workshop remained a haven. The candles glowed steadily, the hum persisted, and the scent of beeswax wrapped gently around anyone who entered. It was a reminder that some things endure beyond time, beyond change, and beyond the rush of progress. Clara often paused in the quiet moments between dipping and lifting, imagining the hands of the first candle maker, John, moving centuries ago. She thought of Margaret Linwood, Eleanor Whittingham, Samuel Aldridge, Lillian Ashford, Margaret Finch, and Helen Cartwright, all shaping the rhythm she now maintained. The golden glow connected her to all of them, as if time itself bent gently around the flame. On one late evening, as the candlelight flickered softly across the room, Clara lit a new wick with deliberate care. She dipped, lifted, and cooled, layering patiently. As the final layer was completed, she allowed the flame to rise. Its golden glow filled the room, steady and alive. She inhaled the soft scent of beeswax and honey, feeling the hum resonate through her very being. The door creaked gently behind her, and she sensed a presence. A new observer, perhaps a future apprentice, drawn to the workshop by curiosity and patience. The candle's hum seemed to rise subtly, acknowledging another generation ready to continue the lineage. And in that quiet, golden light, she whispered softly to herself, "The flame endures. The rhythm continues. Patience, care, and memory persist across centuries. The candle maker is never gone, so long as we honor the light." Close your eyes now. Take a deep, slow breath. Imagine the golden flame, soft and steady, glowing warmly in the corner of a quiet medieval workshop. Feel the faint hum in the air, the honeyed scent of beeswax wrapping gently around you. Sense the rhythm of centuries, the hands of makers long gone guiding yours, layer by layer, heartbeat by heartbeat. Allow the calm to settle within you, and as you drift softly into sleep, remember, the light endures, quietly, patiently, golden and alive, waiting for every hand that approaches it with reverence. The candle maker's legacy is eternal, carried gently through time, one slow, deliberate heartbeat at a time.